Hey everyone, Mike Davis here. Welcome to Horror Stories Read Live, episode 4, I guess. If you are watching live, let me know that you can see me and hear me, but I'm pretty sure you can. I know you can see me, just got to make sure that you can hear me. All right. Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? There we go. Thanks, Alan. All right. Yeah, welcome to Horror Stories Live. I'm trying to get back on the horse because I don't have my trusty little furry co-pilot laying over there. Um, yeah, it's been really hard, um, but I'm trying to get through it. Uh, I miss Oreo. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, that was a fun Patreon episode with Laird that Mike DeBronzo and I recorded the other day with Laird Barron, and yeah, he answered a lot of Patreon questions. Um, it was a lot of fun, and for those of you who are Patreons, I'm going to announce this, but um, if you remember the Deep Background series on the Patreon, which is basically more about the person and how they came to be where they are, who they are, the creator, writer, whatever that they are, um, and um, it's a pretty neat series. I'm proud of it. We've done maybe 5 or 6 people at least so far: Ramsey Campbell, Laird Barron, Nadia Bulkin. Um, let's see here, Livia Llewellyn, several others. Anyway, going to do another deep background this Friday with John Langan. Let me pull up his email because we finally settled on the time. Yeah, okay. So this Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 Central, 4 Pacific. I'm going to do a deep background, record a deep background episode with John Langan. And he thought it would be cool if some of the Patreons were on there and could ask him questions directly. So I told him I thought that was a fun idea. I will post that tomorrow um, in the Patreon. But if you're a Patreon now, you got a heads up on that. So that's gonna be pretty cool, I think. Um, so uh, there's that, and of course we are doing. I'll be doing two things that night because we are doing Patreon Hangout at the usual time, which would be 9 Eastern, 8 Central, 6 Pacific. So, which is not recorded. It's just the $10 and up folks hanging out with us and just chatting, hanging out with the panelists and just chatting. Better write that down because I got to remind everyone. Patreon Hangout and Langan. All right. Hope you guys are doing okay. How was your first day of school, Alan? My wife Danielle teaches English, as you know, and she said that it was a good first day. She said it went really, really quickly because it was just such a whirlwind of everything going on. And at dinner told us a couple of an amusing anecdote of two of the students, only two the whole day, who thought it would be um, funny to act out and say how effing stupid the whole thing was. But she took care of that. building remodel came together well. Is this something you told me about and I've forgotten? Which could very well be. Yeah, you're right, Mark. It used to be September. Um, but anyway, yeah, John Langan, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and on Friday, and then at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, the Hangout. All right, so I've got one or two stories to read for you guys. Um, it looks like I've got a little bit of a crowd already, but you guys just, you know, tell me if you want me to keep doing these. I think the Thursday night thing is pretty well settled. That was an experiment at first too. So this is our fourth episode with the horror stories, and I am very happy to keep doing it every Tuesday night, um, as long as you guys want me to, and you want to listen. Oh, new gym, new band. Oh man, that sounds sweet. So, well, anyway, hello to all of you. Um, at some point, probably this year, I will be taking uh about to get there. Hey Chaz, how's it going? Haven't gotten to your text yet. Oh, thanks, Crimson. Okay, that I really appreciate that. I'm feeling pretty low, and that really helps. Okay, so this is by Scott Thomas. It's a book. It's a collection called Over the Darkening Fields, as you can see, by Scott Thomas. Um, I love this book. I'll read you the back, and then I'll read one or two stories from here. But Scott is definitely in that quiet horror, um, like Charles Grant and some others that I really really love. Why don't I turn the light here and read you the back, and then I'll read you some stories. Oh, before I do that, Kelly Young's book, uh, "The Secret Language of Spiders," that just came out last month, and uh, it's a really good book. Pick it up. It's a nice little novel. Um, but in the first part, and he Tuckerized some of us, friends of his, like me, Mike DeBronzo, Matthew Carpenter, um, a few others, and Pete Rollick, and so on. Anyway, my character wasn't. It's not me, but just he uses some aspects. For example, he said something like in the story that. Uh, oh, here we go. I got it right here. His shock of white hair gave him away. And when the man reached the top step, Daniel smiled and shook the proffered hand with genuine affection, talking about some guy named Michael Davis. I don't know where he gets this white hair thing, but it's nothing but slander, damn it. Um, anyway, that's pretty funny. Get the book. It's on Kindle too at a really reasonable price. All right, so um, if you guys haven't read Over the Darkening Fields, I mean, you really should. It's You're going to get used copies on Amazon, but sometime this year, Scott and I are doing a Kindle version of this so that more people can read it, and this book deserves that. But I'll keep you posted on that. Okay, so here's what's on the back. I'll read it to you, and then I'll read a story or two. In the present, a young woman experiences the mysteries of death through the paintings of an enigmatic artist. Long day. A young couple discovers a restless antique doll in a cemetery. The charred bodies of homeless men appear in the snowy alleys of Boston. A strange mural with an appetite for bones haunts a deserted house. In the past, a woman roams the slums of London hoping to be Jack the Ripper's next victim. Night after night, a man dreams of his lonely lover and her trip to a strange museum. Following a tragic accident, a widow orders the construction of a secret chamber with walls thick enough to muffle screams. And then, in a strange city long ago, women are blinded at birth. This has been the law for 500 years. Now they can see, and they are coming back from the grave to take their revenge. A cryptographer struggles to solve the mystery that may save the living from the dead. So some great, really great stories. Can you guys hear the train? Really great stories in this book. Excuse me, I'm kind of stuffed up today. All right, so I believe I've read this in the distant past, like 3 or 4 years ago, on a Halloween episode. But I am going to read this one first, and it's called Halloween Tea. Scott Thomas and I, um, Scott loves Halloween just like I do. All right, so here we go. October looked good on the old town, Audrey thought, meandering in her car, reacquainting herself with the memories which were Eastboro. The town had grown considerably since she was young, but there remained an abundance of New England charm that developers had not managed to spoil. While there were several shopping centers on the outskirts and numerous business structures looming along Route 9, down in the old town proper, autumn found a graceful haunt. Audrey's first stop was the cemetery. Her long tan coat and auburn hair fluttered as she crunched up a hill overlooking adjacent farmland. There were more monuments than she recalled, the smallest of these half submerged in fallen leaves beneath an ancient maple. She found the stone marked Emily and knelt. Fingers reached to gently brush the cool marble, and a tear fell to kiss the autumn's leafy cheek. She set a small pumpkin beside the stone and smiled sadly. "Happy Halloween," she whispered. Audrey rose, and a soft wind breathed, the pooled leaves trembling. The sun passed behind the western horizon, where naked trees reared in dark tangles against the sky's milky bronze. "Hello," it was an old woman's voice, a voice gone gray, straining as if muffled with webs. "Hi, Mrs. Howe. This is Audrey Putnam." There was a pause. "Audrey, good heavens, what a surprise, my dear." Audrey grinned. "It's so good to hear you. Guess what? I'm calling from the Eastboro Inn." The old voice shed some of its webs. "You're in town? How nice. Why, I haven't seen you in so many years. Do you think you might find the time to drop by?" "Absolutely, with one minor condition. You remember what we used to do every Halloween?" Mrs. Howe was hesitant. "Yes, we had a tea." "Well, I just happen to have two fat pumpkins here, and I was thinking maybe we could. Oh, Audrey, I'm so tired these days, I don't think I'm up to it. The place is such a mess and all. I haven't been well." Audrey's voice returned, patiently bright. "I think a Halloween tea would do you good. I'll do all the work." Mrs. Howe agreed reluctantly and hung up the phone. She sat in the dimness of her living room, amidst the shadows that smelled like old newspapers. She gazed over at the framed picture of a little girl with smile-sparked eyes and a hair of braided flax. The image was sun-faded, blurring to sepia like a leaf turning. Audrey had been Emily's best friend. For years following the accident, Audrey had still come around. They had helped to heal one another, filling the chilled hollows of their hearts with warm cookies and jelly-souled tarts. There was iced tea in the summer when the sweat ran like tears and laughter to fend off the winter's shrill dusk. They had shared long afternoons of talk and tea, carving their own brief traditions upon the rushing years, until even those gave way to the inevitability of distance. Audrey sought her dreams in a far-off state. Then there were only letters and cards, and the occasional call. Mrs. Howe brushed the warm trickle from her cheek and headed for the kitchen. For long hours of the night she bustled, dusting off her pans and cookie sheets, once more filling dark corners with the warm aroma of baking. Then it was up into the creaky attic, wobbling amidst precarious heaps. A bare bulb rocked and treacle shadows poured as she sought out her old boxes of Halloween treasures. She smiled, unraveling them. Ceramic figures lovingly packed in crinkly newspaper shrouds, candles and cutouts like rediscovered friends. With so much to do, Mrs. Howe forgot how sickly she had been, how tired before Audrey's call. She spent much of the night whisking through the old house like an autumn breeze. It was well after midnight when something started scratching at the back door. Mrs. Howe put down the small plastic witch she had been holding and was moving toward the kitchen when she suffered one of her spells. Dizziness came over her, and there was the strange burning in her chest, as if some small internal blotch of darkness ached to spread, gnawing her away to nothing. A trembling hand reached the knob and pulled the door open. A leafy sigh of wind gushed into the kitchen as Mrs. Howe looked down at the doorstep. The breeze cooled the burning in her chest, and she smiled like a jack-o'-lantern at the sight of a fat, black cat sitting there, grinning up at her. There was something in the air. It was more subtle than when Audrey had been younger, but it was still there, flitting leaf-like, fluttering bat-like through the rooms of her heart on a moon-frosted breeze. It was an anticipatory sensation that drew her like some ancient gravity. It beckoned to her with rattling cornstalk voices, singing cider perfume through leaf-sparse branches. Only one day a year she felt it, on the afternoon of October 31st, when all the world seemed to tilt toward the mystical night. Hey, Jeff. Familiar streets passed through the warm woman's windshield. Most of the urgent colors had passed. Still, there were sporadic gushes of crimson and amber. The houses were old high things, some still enveloped in mantles of maple condominium. Audrey could remember braving those stairs, standing in puddles of porch light as screen doors whined and towering adults chuckled down. Treats had rained into her hungry chocolate-breathed bag, How the houses had loomed then, the streets stretching off, elastic charcoal murals, jack-o'-lanterns dappling, the smell of wood smoke, ethereal and enticing. Coppery rays of afternoon sunlight were slanting toward the trees when Audrey pulled up outside Mrs. Howe's house. The place looked tired, overgrown and weedy, but there was still a thrill of familiarity, a ghost of coziness. Audrey carried a shopping bag full of goodies onto the porch, then went back to get the pumpkins. She knocked. The door opened. "Trick or treat!" Audrey exclaimed. They hugged. Mrs. Howe looked over the younger woman who was in her mid-30s, pretty, with chocolate eyes and auburn hair. She wore a black skirt and a peach-colored sweater. Little gold skull earrings gleamed. Mrs. Howe was willowy gray, her eyes the blue of a September sky, still glinting from out of the bark-like creases of her flesh. She wore a long black gown and shawl. "Come in, come in." Candles lit the foyer like some initiatory tunnel leading into the heart of the season. Indeed, the place was something of a Halloween decoration museum or shrine. Mrs. Howe's extensive collection included rare and antiquated treasures, from old faded Denison cutouts to imported German papier-mâché vegetable spirits dating from 1900. A slender glass black cat, obviously a deco-inspired work, seemed ready to pounce from the bookcase as they entered the living room. Audrey ducked beneath a brittle construction paper chain she and Emily had made in the fourth grade. The orange had faded to a dusty peach, and the black had gone gray. A ponderous cat waddled out of the shadows, rubbing against Audrey's ankles. "Basil!" She reached down to stroke the warm, purring blackness. They walked deeper into the living room where a tape of low, rumbling organ music was playing. Audrey smiled, delighted. A ceramic skull sat on the table in a nest of colorful leaves, surrounded by plates loaded with pastries, cheeses, apples, and nuts. She wagged her head. "I thought you were too tired." "So did I," Mrs. Howe admitted. "It's lovely." Audrey glanced over at a picture of Emily, dressed as a bunny, the picture frame carefully ringed and bittersweet. Something caught in her throat. "So," Mrs. House said, clapping her hands together, "where are those pumpkins?" Excuse me. They stood on the porch, admiring their handiwork as purple saturated the dusk sky. The carved pumpkins flanked the door, bright tongues flicking behind lipless mouths, the freshly cut features beating with moisture. Audrey turned, looking up and down the street. They were already out, small figures rustling along shaded sidewalks, ectoplasmic sheets swaying, miniature witches giggling and shrieking. The October sun seemed to crackle as it died behind the skeleton trees. "I was reading about the history of Halloween," Mrs. Howe said, leaning on the porch railing, eyeing the last brassy glimmers. "This night was New Year's Eve to the ancient Celts. They thought the old year died at sunset And the new year did not start until sunrise on November 1st. The period between was a timeless place when the dead returned. Audrey smiled, inhaling the leaves and wood smoke and candle-warmed pumpkins. She nodded. Mrs. Howe slumped forward, catching a porch beam for support. She put a hand to her chest and grimaced. Mrs. Howe, I'm all right, just a little dizzy. Audrey looked concerned, taking a step closer, taking the woman's frail arm. Shall we have tea, Audrey? Yes. Earl Grey with orange food coloring. Old radio shows on the tape player. Arch Obler's Lights Out. Orson Welles' War of the Worlds. Trick-or-treaters kicked through jaundiced leaves and knocked and chanted at the gourd-guarded door. A lidded stew pot sat on a stove burner. The popcorn kettles inside, kicking like rain on tin. Had there ever been such a magic night? The hours crept by. They sat by the fireplace as birch crackled in its flickering bed of flame, painting their shadows as long, ghastly things. Mulled cider followed the tea, and Mrs. Howe read M.R. James's "Oh, Whistle, and I'll Come to You, My Lad," with Basil curled humming in her lap. I agree, Mark. If there is one, it should be like this. The candy hunters had retired to their own cozy abodes, and even the older pranksters had turned the streets over to the scurrying patrols of citrine leaves. The hours ticked as they reminisced. 1, 2, 3 in the morning. The pumpkins burned out, and a gentle drizzle fell. Audrey grew drowsy, slumped in her wing chair. The fireplace pulsed with coals, casting a serene glow on the picture of little Emily. The knock woke Audrey. Oh, I must have dozed off. Mrs. Howe sat forward. I'll get it. Basil leapt down from the old woman's lap and climbed up onto Audrey. He purred as he always had, those many years ago, rubbing his head against the woman's chin. He had that old cozy smell that the house did. Mrs. Howe made for the front door, shuffling along in her black gown. Audrey glanced at the clock. There were only minutes left until dawn. She leaned forward so that she could see out into the foyer. The door opened, welcoming in the last of October's cool exhalations. A small child stood on the porch. She was so unnaturally thin that her faded bunny suit hung on her frame like the skin of a hound. Flaxen braids framed the mask, and she looked up at the old woman through its hollow eyes. The girl held out a pale hand, and Mrs. Howe took it, stepping outside with her, out into the leaves and the fading darkness. Basil perked, turning toward the breeze. It occurred to Audrey at last, as she sat stroking his dark fur, that Basil had died in his sleep many years before. The cat gave a meow and leapt down, pattering across the room, through the hallway, and out behind Mrs. Howe and the little girl. The door swung shut. Audrey sat by the fireplace, a smile on her lips as the first flush of dawn illuminated the lacy frost on the living room windows. Happy Halloween, she whispered. So that is Halloween Tea by Jeff Thomas. Again, sometime this year, Scott and I are doing a Kindle version of this, but you can still get used copies on Amazon and so forth. Uh, so, it occurred to me as I was reading this to say again that if I was narrating a book or a story, every time I missed a word or stumbled over a word or whatnot, that would be edited out and I'd fix it, obviously. But that's not what this is about. This is about, for those who can make it live, reading live. And, you know, so everyone at the same time listening to the same thing, if that makes sense. Excuse me. Yeah, Scott's right up there in the quiet horror, right up there with Charles Grant, Kevin Lucia, and there are plenty of others that I'm not thinking of right now. Excuse me, but I love that personally. So now you guys tell me if you want me to read another one or if you're done for the night. I know that Alan especially has to get up early in the morning, but I will do whatever you guys want me to do. So just comment in the side chat. Um, Again, I will post this tomorrow, but the Patreons can join myself and John Langan for a deep background episode. Um, what did I say? Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, and I'll post this tomorrow. But if you're watching live or tomorrow morning, you got a heads up on it. If you can be there and if you want to be there. John's idea, so I thought it would be a fun thing to do as well. All right, one more. If that's what you guys want, I can do that. Thanks for spending your part of your Tuesday night with me. Um, yeah, there's something about I always think of you know how we were growing up as a species, in prehistory, and when we were all part of tribes, and those long nights that everyone would sit around the campfire in a lot of cases, and stories is stories are what one of the things that kept us going. There's a reason why um, we love we love fiction, and there's a reason why we love telling stories and listening to stories that got us through. You know, um, it's every bit as important as the natural selection. Um, other than that, you know what? I'm too tired to talk about evolution and natural selection, but that's my point. All right, so I'll read, unless you guys have heard this before, I'll read the other story I'll read is called Winter Census because it's now I love every story in this collection, but this one's my favorite, even more than Halloween Tea. And by the way, the in Halloween Tea, when they listen to old time radio and so forth, um, I did that growing up, and there's just something about those old horror episodes. And I listen to them all the time still, but especially around Halloween. And I know, Jeff, if you're still there, Thomas Brothers had traditions, and that was one of them around Halloween. Don't want to speak for you, Jeff, but we've talked about it. Anyway, there he is. It's true. Um, Thanks for joining, Jeff. Appreciate it. All right, you find the right page here. I think it was right after Halloween tea, and I didn't realize it. And 1 second. Okay, here. No, it's not there. Give me 1 second here. Take a look at the book instead of the PDF. Winter Census is on page 83. Thanks, man. Stevie Wayne, huh? I'll take it. That's a compliment. Watch out for the fog. Yeah, the Tuesday nights and the Thursday nights, I'm repeating myself, but for those who haven't heard it yet, it's if you enjoy late night talk radio, things like that, especially in the past, then that's sort of what I'm going for. That voice in the night that's talking about some scary stuff sometimes, reading stories, talking about horror and other things. Um, so yeah, the book Summer of Night by um, Dan Simmons. I've read several times. It's a really good book, uh, and it's set in, I believe, 1964. And these boys that are 11, 12, something like that, confront um, an evil in their town, basically. But that's really the short version. But anyway, one of the boys, he every night he listens to late night radio. He'll listen to games. He'll listen to talk radio. But his favorite are when people call in and they discuss things, and um, makes me think of that. All right, yeah, I like it. I personally prefer. Um, I like Summer of Night better, but yeah, obviously it is a great novel. All right, Winter Census by Scott Thomas. Here we go. This isn't a story about the conventional horrors of homeless life. Not that I couldn't fill volumes with that stuff. But since you asked me for the most disturbing thing I've seen, I'll tell you. It was late December, and I was a volunteer with a group working for the mayor's office. It was an annual event. Our task was to go around the city and take account of all the homeless people we could find. It was only my second time, though I'd been involved with the shelters for several years, and I'd organized food drives and things of that nature going back 9 or 10. I was accompanied by a young guy named Don, who was an EMT, and Father Ed Willard, a priest who had dedicated so much time and soul to looking after the disadvantaged that he had been written up in a national news magazine and had made a number of appearances on local television. We were quite the dedicated crew. The winter had been mild up until that night, generally speaking. Though it's true what they say about New England weather, it can change in a flash. It's best not to get complacent, even with a long stretch of merciful temperatures. It can drop down to a wind chill of 30 degrees below faster than you can say hypothermia. That night, we got the first real wintry stuff of the season. It was bitter cold and snowing pretty good. Windy, too. A ragtag army of vehicles spread out to explore the city, armed with flashlights and blankets. I don't mind telling you that the census adventure could be frightening at times. We would venture into some pretty rough areas, and there were some scary characters around. Ever drive through Roxbury after dark? I think if I were to go again, I'd want to carry a gun, especially after that night. It didn't take us long. They were huddled in doorways, in alleys, in places you wouldn't believe. People can get pretty creative and fit their bodies into some strange places in order to get out of the cold. We had to joke to keep each other's spirits up because the tragedy factor was so profound. I remember an old lady we found curled up on a grid to catch the heat that came up. She had a flattened refrigerator box over her head, and snow had coated it. She was clinging to an old, beat-up stuffed dog toy, and her coat pockets were filled with empty bottles. She seemed to be somewhat retarded. Images like this made me feel like murdering career welfare abusers. My tax dollars were doing nothing for that suffering old woman, while I'd known young breed-for-bucks, mothers, and smug young men who bragged about what a great country America was because, besides working a job, they benefited from food stamps and Medicare. One encounters a lot of injustice out in the streets. Don thought the woman's breathing was bad and that she was a good candidate for frostbite. We decided to call an ambulance. Turns out she ended up losing a few toes. Well, I'll get to the point, seeing as how it's getting kind of late. We had gone into the North End, where there were a good deal of old brick buildings. We parked, then crunched along on the snow while flakes whirled down through the pink haze of the street lamps. Father Willard became concerned when he couldn't find a Vietnam vet named Reggie, who usually stayed at this particular indented area behind a building, between two dumpsters. Hey, Don had said, look at this. Don was pointing at what appeared to be drag marks, wide, as if someone had been pulled along the pavement on his back. We followed them out to the street and saw that they led to an alley, which, due to the snow, was not as dark as it normally would have been. Don thought he saw someone extremely tall flit by the opening of the alley, but Father Willard said that Reggie was a very short man. We were starting over, squinting through the slanting snowfall, when we saw these three strobe-like flashes of red come from inside that alley. We ran. I was the first one to see it. At the far end of the alley, where the strewn trash was smoothed over in gentle waves by the accumulated white, there was a blackened heap of steaming human bones. The stench was enough to make you sick. Dear God, Father Willard said. What the hell happened? I asked, squinting down at the pieces that were stacked like so much kindling. He must have built a fire to keep warm, Don offered weakly. I wondered how he could have burned down so thoroughly. I mean, there was no sign of scorched clothing, no suggestion of skin, or muscle or organs. There were only bones. Well, maybe, Don conjectured, somebody killed him and set the corpse on fire. I nodded. In those days, in these days when teenage kids were killing each other over sneakers and jackets, it was quite likely that someone would kill a poor homeless guy for kicks and then set him on fire. Hopefully, he was already dead before the flames were lit. Although this theory offered a reasonable explanation as to how the man was burned, it did not explain the high degree of incineration. I'm going out to the car to phone the police, I said. I was halfway to the vehicle when I paused. I had just passed the opening of another alley when I saw a great shadow sweep over the snow in front of me. Even taking into account the fact that a shadow would have appeared stretched at such an angle, I determined that whoever made it would have to have been over 7 feet tall. The silhouette showed a figure in a long cloak-like garment with a hood, carrying some type of staff. There seemed to be a wild crown of bare branches and twigs sticking up from the head, and fir branches tied to it so that they stuck out from the shoulders and wound around the sleeves. I was startled and only saw for a brief moment as this shadow passed. I spun around. The mouth of the alley was empty, but for the windy, fluttering snow. It was a long and bitter night. The snow continued to fall steadily until there were several inches. We had counted as many stray souls as possible before returning to our own safe homes, our cozy beds. Strangely enough, we not only tallied up the number of homeless, there was another count taken, a grim and perplexing one. For on that night, 12 sets of smoky, blackened human bones were found in the snow-haunted alleys of Boston. That's Winter Census by Scott Thomas. Now, if you ask people in the weird fiction community, writers, readers, artists, creators, what weird fiction is, good night, Chaz. You'll probably get different answers, but more or less tending toward the same kind of fiction. Me, I always say, you know, to me, weird fiction is this happened, this incident happened, XYZ happened, and I have no explanation for it. It just happened. And it's more complicated than that, but that's exactly what this story does. And ambiguity in fiction done right, like this, is very appealing to me. Um, but yeah, in Winter Census, the narrator is saying this is the scariest thing that I've seen out on the streets. This is what happened. What the hell? 12 sets of smoky, blackened human bones. There's no easy explanation for this. There's no explanation for it. Um, so all the narrator is saying is, "Hey, look, this happened. This happened. I experienced this really strange thing, and I have no explanation for it." Anyway, that's one way I think of weird fiction. It's very, and people will get into, a lot of people will get into it in the panels coming up at Necronomicon, in some panels. But it's slippery, but usually you know it when you're reading it, even if you can't define it exactly. Anyway, that's my 2 cents on weird fiction. Um, if you like these two stories, either get the book now, or if you want to benefit Scott, then you could wait until you could get a print now, if you wanted, because there's only so many of them out there. They're not going to be reprinted on paper anyway. But he'll actually get a paycheck for the Kindle versions that we're going to have out later this year. So yeah, just kind of um, think about that, and hopefully, I'll announce it when it's out, and you can get it then if you want, or you can get a print and you can get a Kindle copy. Um, this is just us sitting around the virtual campfire, telling stories, listening to stories. Um, I don't know. Maybe once in a while on a Tuesday night, I can have someone with me, and do a, they can read a story, or I can read a story. Or if you guys would rather it just always be me, that's fine too. Um, so yeah, all right. Uh, I know a lot of you have work in the morning. I know my co-panelist and good friend, Alan Hughes, has to work in the morning. He's a history teacher. Jeff, you son of a gun, you're retired. Damn it. So I'm jealous. But check out Jeff Thomas's stuff too, guys. I mean, if you haven't already. And uh, the unknown country stuff that he's doing is just very, very fascinating stuff. So yeah, I sure as hell hope it has an upside. Growing old. Uh, I I got old about overnight about 15 years ago. So really, one night, I won't keep you guys, but I'll just say this and let you go. But one night, I was a realtor. I really liked my job and was making pretty decent money too. Um, I looked at real estate as not a sales job at all, but just someone already wants to buy a house. You can't say something slick to talk somebody into buying a house. I mean, come on. Um, that's a huge purchase. But what you can do is not be a salesperson, and you can instead say, this is what I did. People, for example, who are looking to buy a house, you know, I'm offering you my guidance and my expertise, and so on and so forth. So anyway, I don't know if you needed to know that, but um, it was a Sunday night, and I was thinking, Danielle and little Logan, toddler Logan at the time, were in Illinois, staying with Danielle's mom for quite a few months to for so that Danielle could be in the house with her and help her. She couldn't live alone at that point. And I really missed my wife and my son, of course. But the right thing is not always the easy thing. And Danielle had really, really good parents, and she in turn was a really, really great daughter, and she was there taking care of her mom. So my point is, I was alone in the house for months, and Sunday night, I remember thinking as I went to bed, man, I really love my job. Some people hate it, hate their job. They think, oh, I got to get up on Monday morning, and I just can't stand it. And I just thought, I'm I'm grateful. Just like I'm grateful for this quote unquote job right here. Uh, and I thought, I can't wait to go to work in the morning. I love doing this. Well, bam! It was like a truck hit me. I thought I had the worst flu in the history of mankind. I hurt so bad, um, and just all kinds of flu-like symptoms, and my arm started swelling up horribly. But the short version is that I was in the hospital for like 2 weeks. Um, a friend took me to my doctor, my GP, and he took one look at me. I remember, and he said, "You're going to the hospital," and that's what happened. But anyway, ever since that Monday, which ironically, right before that, I thought how much I love my job and everything. Ever since then, bam, I sort of got old overnight with all the pain and the symptoms and everything. But you know what? I'm not complaining, just explaining. If that hadn't happened, if I hadn't gotten sick, uh, I wouldn't be here talking to you guys right now. So it's not that I would have chosen to be sick per se. If I had a choice, I wouldn't. But I try to take anything bad that happens. I mean, I'm not perfect. I screw up all the time. But I try to take anything bad that happens, and I ask myself, how can I make some good come of this? And the rest is history. We moved down to Texas, and I started doing this, and I'm glad. So anyway, guys, I'm sorry for the speech. I guess you didn't need all that. Um, I hope all you guys are having a great night, and join me on Thursday at 11 p.m. Eastern for late night. So thanks a lot, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week. Until then.